Hey everyone, George here with Wine Industry Network. Welcome to another episode of the Win Insider Series. And today I'm excited. We've got Dave McIntyre. Dave and I have not ever had a chance to meet, so this is kind of a cool one for me to meet somebody that I've known about but haven't had a chance to chat with. So Dave, welcome.
Thank you. Hi, George. Nice to meet you too.
So for most of you that are in the wine world, probably know Dave best for his time at the Washington Post as the wine writer. I think, Dave, you were there for like 16 years. And you still have the wine line that's now on Substack, which is kind of your, I guess, like a blog. I don't even know what we call it. Can't keep up with what we're calling things these days.
Yeah, I started Dave McIntyre's wine line, and putting my name on it was a rare act of hubris and self-marketing for me. But I started it in 1999 as an email newsletter, which I sent to 20 or 30 people who gave me their email addresses and said, yes, I'd like to hear from you. And sort of built it over the years, migrated to TypePad and then ultimately to Blogger, or actually I think Blogger first, then TypePad, and then WordPress. And it kind of, it was one of the earlier blogs, as somebody said to me years later, but I didn't really keep it up when I had paying gigs
Right.
to write for. So I'm now picking it up again and doing it on Substack since I have left the Washington Post, just to sort of keep my, feet in the water and my hand in the game.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty active. I was, kind of prepping for the call and, going through the Substack, and it seems like you're as busy as ever. I mean, you're putting stuff up there pretty regularly. I go, I doesn't seem that retired. I don't know.
Well, it's, I guess, the initial burst of enthusiasm. I don't want to overdo it, obviously, because work-life balance, and people don't necessarily need to get an email from me, every day. So I'm right now trying to settle into maybe twice a week with one bigger post and then a smaller one, and just to establish a rhythm and see what people respond to, what they like, what I like doing, and hopefully it'll be sustainable.
I hope so too. I mean, it's, what I have a lot of things I want to talk about. So I'm trying to stay on some sort of a track, but I wanted to somehow talk a little bit about, it's like, I feel like some of what we're going through is, well, how I want to phrase this. The wine journalists are such an important part of the success that I think we've experienced over the last 25 or 30 years. It's the journalists that have helped the consumers find things that they may not have found on their own. I think in a lot of ways, I think you really did a good job of making wine feel more approachable. Where for a lot of people, if they didn't grow up with wine, I didn't grow up with wine on my table. It was intimidating. I think that's people still feel that. But as I think you were one of the last writers for a major publication, a major newspaper publication. And I know there's a lot of people out there, that are still writing, but it's just a different kind of a game. And I really was, in thinking about this interview, feel like, the journalists, I don't think they get enough credit for the role that they played in helping us experience the success that we've had over the last couple of decades. And I mean, do you see where I'm coming from on that? Do you feel that?
Yeah, I do, and it's, I think, the nature of the newspaper business, and I should clarify that I've always been freelance. I've never been a Washington Post employee, so I have not really seen it from the inside from that way. But for instance, I always felt that my greatest impact was in the print edition of the food section on Wednesday morning in the Washington Post, because when I would hear from a retailer or a distributor that my review caused a bump in sales,
Yeah.
and people were coming into the store with the column in hand saying, do you have this wine? I would ask, well, did they have the print edition or did they have a computer printout?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I never heard anyone say it was a computer printout.
Right.
It was always the print edition. And yet the way the newspaper business is going, everything now is digital.
Yeah.
The definition of the audience is nationwide because they've got subscribers in Denver and Seattle, and they don't care about Virginia wine.
Right.
So, one of my big things was always to write about local wine, and that began to get a bit of a cold shoulder. And this is just, it's just the way the business goes. And there was always this sort of frisson because I was still recommending wines that were available locally, and people were still responding to that and say, well, where can I get this?
Yeah.
And things like that. But there was that sort of move towards a wider focus of the business as a whole. And then, of course, we can get into search engine optimization and things like that that are kind of work against the idea of a traditional wine column that you and I maybe, enjoyed reading when we first got interested in wine.
Yeah.
I won't say how many years ago it was for me. We might get into that in the discussion. But.
Yeah. No, it's been a minute for me as well. And you touch on something that I thought was really great is that you were such an advocate, a cheerleader for the Eastern wine market. And so, like, I think a lot of folks that wound up coming up through the California wine industry. So most of my winery experience has been Sonoma and Napa to a slightly lesser degree. I was definitely guilty of feeling like the wine world sort of ended on the eastern border of California and just didn't pay a lot of attention to the East Coast. And fast forward when I got into what I'm doing now with Wine Industry Network, where we work a lot with industry vendors, so bottle, barrel, cork guys, and our audience would be the wineries across the country. We tried to establish a new trade show and conference for the Eastern wine industry in DC, actually. We were at the what's the big Wardman Park Marriott near the zoo. Huge hotel, great hotel, and so this was, I think it was like 2016 through 2019. We did 3 years there, and I had a lot of support from the Eastern wineries, but I had a hard time. DC was great food and wine city. I mean, just awesome. The vendors loved to come there, but we struggled with trying to get the wineries from coming out of rural areas to come into DC. Mostly, probably, it's very expensive. We had great programs, but the point where I'm going with this is that it forced me to start to establish these relationships with the Virginia Wineries Association, people like Kevin Addix from Maryland, who you probably know.
Yeah, he's now a Secretary of Agriculture.
Yeah, he's
from Maryland.
He was a huge help. I obviously worked very closely with Wine America, who's very established up and down the East Coast. Pennsylvania gang. I mean, it was such an eye-opening experience for me. And it was so cool because not only were the wines better than I had anticipated. Again, they're just based on nothing but ignorance. And I felt like they were getting better each year. But the whole industry on the East Coast just had a really cool vibe of it kind of reminded me, I think, of maybe what it was like even before I got started in the wine industry, which was in the early 1990s. They're out there just helping each other out, and they were very approachable. A lot of them experienced great success because they had so much backyard support. And there weren't, they didn't have I'm here in Healdsburg in Sonoma County. I mean, there's probably like 500 wineries within 10 miles. You know what I mean? They're not, it's just a completely different scene. So having someone like you advocate for those local guys, I mean, that must have felt pretty good. And I know they appreciated it.
Yeah, I think so. I hope so. And I hope to be able to do more of that now with Dave McIntyre's Wine Line and my Substack, obviously for a smaller audience than for the Washington Post. But, now that I'm full-time retired from that and my day job, I can hopefully get out to more wineries. Unfortunately, we don't have 500 within 10 miles. It's about an hour to get to the closest one. And Beltway traffic makes it 2 hours.
Oh my gosh, I'll tell you what. But once you're in the city, though, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Did you see, that was kind of an eye-opening experience for me, T. When I first started coming into DC as we were getting the show started the planning for the show, I didn't realize what a great food and wine city it was, and such kind of an international flair. I mean, was that something that you saw sort of evolve over time while you were with the writing for the Post?
Well, definitely. I think it began earlier than that. In a way, we were kind of the old cliche is that DC was kind of a steakhouse town, and there was the Republican steakhouse and the Democrat steakhouse, and that began in I guess, the late 70s, early 80s. We got one of the first Nouvelle Cuisine restaurants in the country was here in DC, Pavillon, and then Jean-Louis opened at the Watergate, and we had some, high-end French for a while. But yeah, it's a great international audience, of course, because you have diplomats from around the world, and international institutions have offices here. So it's a very diverse population.
Do you actually live in DC proper?
No, I'm in Silver Spring, Maryland, so just outside, and I grew up on the Virginia side and moved to
Did,
Maryland. So
so Dave, did you grow up with your family of did you grow up like a wine drinking family? How did you wind up on this path?
not at all, actually. We were kind of teetotalers. My mother would occasionally sneak a bottle of Riunite into the refrigerator drawer to have a glass after my dad went to bed. But uh, no, it was later in life that I just got interested in wine. Actually, early in our marriage, my wife and I were out your way in California visiting friends, and they took us up to Napa for an afternoon, and we kind of got the bug there. And then when we came back, we would start visiting the wine stores in DC on Saturdays for the free tastings. We called it the Stations of the Vine pilgrimage. We knew which store opened their tasting at noon and which one closed at 5, sort of thing. And met a lot of people. And since we got interested in wine by visiting wineries in Napa, we started visiting the wineries in Northern Virginia. And in the 80s and 90s, there weren't all that many. It
Right.
was just beginning to explode at that point. And it was a great time to get involved and get interested in it. So that began our love of local wines.
Now, were you a journalist at that point, or were you writing about other things? Like, how did you wind up? Okay, now I'm writing about wine. How did that start?
I was working as a journalist for some trade publications, which is kind of a Washington, D.C. thing. You end up writing a very narrow regulatory topic. And I was the reporter who would stay to the very end of the congressional hearing to write down everything the very last witness said long after all the other press had left. And things like that. So writing about wine became a sideline, and it was a way to learn about it. And I slowly built that up into a fairly successful sideline.
Yeah, no, I mean, really well known. How did you were you trying to like strike a balance between supporting the guys in the backyard, the Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania guys, or versus writing about California or imports? How did you approach that?
Well, are you talking about when I started doing the post column?
Yeah, when you started the Post column.
Okay, so that would have been in October of 2008 when I was offered that opportunity. And I spoke to the editor and said basically I wanted to do like 4 things. So it's once a week. So I wanted to hit these themes each month. And
Yeah.
one of those was to be something local. It could be
Okay.
a local som who's doing something interesting with the wine program, or even a store, but more often than not, a winery. And they were very supportive of that. Until the dynamic that I mentioned earlier, which began about 6 or 7 years later when a certain life event happened at the Washington Post. But um, the they were, so that was sort of at the beginning. And also that was also when the great financial crisis happened. So I also started focusing on what I called recession busters, which was wines under $10 retail, and ultimately moved that up to 15. But kept that going for a few years, and that was an emphasis on finding really good value wines that punch above their price, and rather than the more expensive wines that really, wine lovers might gravitate to,
Right.
but can find, more easily, because there's so many good wines out there, and there's so many not so good ones. So finding the ones that were really good for the money was important.
No, but and they're out there, right? It's a little like treasure hunting, and that's again, I think a good, just a great role that someone in your position could play to help people make fewer
Yeah.
mistakes, right? When you're out there taking guess. I should go back to, so before you started with the Post, you had your, was it like a newsletter, Dave, that you had going out, like an email newsletter that you were sending, or like, or
That's how I started with it.
hmm,
And then as a blog, when, because nobody was calling them blogs in
yeah,
1999. But I was also writing for other sites. There was something out your way. The Santa Rosa Press Democrat had a website for a while called
yeah,
winetoday.com, that was edited by Tim Fish and Leslie Sabraco.
oh yeah,
And so I wrote several articles for them, including some on Virginia.
okay,
And I wrote for some local magazines here in the DC area as well, on wine and restaurants for a while, and before getting the offer from the Post. And that was enough work that I could basically say, okay, this is it. I'm not going to be
yeah.
writing much else.
One of the things that I always think people find curious is about how much wine was being shipped to you at different points of your career. I mean, were you just getting inundated with samples and requests to review and write? I mean, it had to be overwhelming at times.
Once with the Post, yes, and it did. And that's, it's something I hate to complain about, because, oh wow,
Right, right.
so much wine, but it's a lot of work, it's a lot of organization, and it's, yeah, it was a lot.
Well, you feel bad not getting to everything, but it's impossible to get to everything, right? It's just
Right.
too much. One of the things that areas we part of your reputation is that you did a really good job of demystifying wine, making it feel more approachable and sort of helping people not feel so intimidated who, again, like we said earlier, didn't grow up with it. Was that like a conscious decision and from on your perspective of trying to make wine more approachable for people that were intimidated?
Yeah, it was, and I think that sort of fits a newspaper wine column model.
Yeah,
It's at that point in 2008. Remember, we were still in the French paradox boom
yeah,
of wine drinking, and the idea was to try to, kind of promote it as an everyday beverage like it is in Europe, which it never really has been for Americans. And that meant obviously focusing on lower price wines, making it accessible, trying to take away the intimidation factor, and that great variety, turn that into not an obstacle but an advantage and an adventure. And unfortunately, I think the business is going in the opposite direction now. With lower price brands falling off the market, and Constellation now getting out of wine altogether. People are more concentrating on the higher priced, and wine is becoming more a special occasion drink
yeah.
again. But I guess I'm just showing my age there.
No, I mean I see it. I mean, it's very interesting times, and regardless of who I speak with, and obviously I'm in the heart of it and pretty well connected. Even the older guys that go like, "Oh, we've been through some weird things. We haven't been through anything quite like this." Uh, in the last, 25 or 30 years. And, this was the first time that I would pick a valley, Dry Creek Valley, Alexander Valley, where I am in Sonoma County. And especially once the leaves fell off the vines, to see so many shriveled bunches hanging out there in the vineyard, and it's just like, wow, this is crazy. And unfortunately it doesn't look like anything's going to change in the near future. But I think what we're missing are those very, affordable wines that aren't so serious, that people can, use as a starter wine. I mean, I have two daughters that are in their 20s. They grew up in a different situation, growing up in wine country, and with some, father who worked in the wine industry. But even they wanted to go out and explore. It's like, it's just gotten so expensive. The tasting fees and just the tasting fees alone are just like cost prohibitive. And we've got to figure that out, because we're not doing ourselves any favors. Although I do think it's not as bad in areas outside of Northern California. I people that I do speak with, more anecdotal, in other regions, they seem to be doing okay, but because they do have so much of that homegrown backyard support.
Well, I think so. Not so much perhaps on the cost of the wine. For instance, with Virginia wine, it's expensive. The real estate is expensive. They don't make a whole lot.
Yeah.
To get the price down, you have to scale up, and they don't have that business model for the most part. There are one or two that are making something in the $10 to $15 range that's pretty good stuff, but most of them are quite expensive. And I still hear, oh yeah, Virginia makes some nice wine, but it's so expensive. I'm like, well, gee, man, have you looked at Napa lately?
I know.
You know, but so there is that, and then again, that too goes to I guess the trend that it's not really going towards an everyday drink.
Yeah.
The French paradox was have a glass of red wine every day for your heart. And now it's like, we're being told that every sip we take is going to give us cancer and things like that. But that's a different downer subject.
Yeah, yeah, I know. There's nothing. It feels like there's nothing good to be happy about right now. But I keep waiting for something. There was a minute there where, and we'll see what happens. I mean, there's so much really good bulk wine on in the tank right now, that you could get on very inexpensively, that I keep hoping that there's going to be another kind of a $2 chuck phenomenon, where somebody big enough can come through and clean up all that bulk wine and package it up and put it out there at a price point that you just can barely say no to. And maybe that'll trigger people, to kind of stay with the program for a while. But yeah, it's unusual times for sure, which is actually kind of leads me to another question I wanted to ask you about. So the landscape for journalists has changed so much, and I know there's a lot of new and younger journalists that look up to people like yourself. Like, what kind of advice do you have for people that say, "Hey, I want to get in the game. I want to write about wine." Dave, do you have any advice for me? I mean, do you ever have those kind of conversations?
Yeah, actually, I had one earlier today, but I mean, in a way, there's there's been a great democratization. Because when I started, I would pitch some article ideas, and I said, "Well, can you show me something you've written?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm just starting." But now with the internet, you can publish a blog, you can start a Substack, and you post a few things. You have clips. You don't have to. It's the old conundrum of you can't get the job unless you have experience at it,
Yeah.
right? Sort of thing. And so blogging has democratized that to a large degree, and I think that's good, because you have people who are just hobbyists because they like to write, and they like, they're sort of diarists, and that's fine. And then you have some serious writers that have come out of that, and really that trend sort of coincided with my development of my writing career. So I was actually in both print and online, and that was really helpful to me. Um, the main advice I would give is though, is to be serious about it. There are people who are obviously in it for freebies,
Yeah.
and they're. I mean, you mentioned the samples that I get, and yeah, that's true. It's you have to treat it with respect, and it don't just like be demanding things. And there are people who do that.
Yeah.
Now, of course, it's not the bloggers, it's the influencers.
Right.
You're seeing that people showing up at a winery and posing for photos and with the bottle of wine, and they want the velvet glove treatment from the winery and things like that. So, that's where I'm showing my age again. I just sort of smile at that.
Did you get to do a lot of travel, like wine travel throughout in your career? And did you have any favorite places that when you think back about it that you particularly enjoyed?
Um, Not a whole lot because I had a full-time job, and any travel I did would be annual leave from that. So that limited it. Uh, but yeah, I obviously love Northern California. My wife and I started our love of wine in Napa, and we visited Napa and Sonoma several times. So still have a fondness for those areas. Um, I really love the Douro Valley. I've been lucky enough to go there a few times, and also Bordeaux and Burgundy, of course. But actually, the sleeper would be Okanagan Valley up in British Columbia. They've had a wicked couple of years with winter weather and winter kill there, but man, that place is gorgeous, and the wines are terrific. I, I like the Finger Lakes too.
Yeah.
And that's fairly easy for me to get to. It's 5 hours away, 5 or 6 hour drive, but um, that's a lot of fun as well.
Yeah, I got to go to the Finger Lakes for the first time a few years ago, and it was an awesome experience up there. It was just beautiful. We were up there in the fall, and it was just, the colors. It was just mind-boggling. It was just
Yeah.
fantastic. What do you think from a journalist perspective? Um, do you see as the we talked a little bit about, but are there any other hurdles that you feel like the industry needs to really address and overcome to stabilize, turn things around?
Um, well, I think you mentioned the overproduction
Yeah,
and the surplus, so I think there's a correction beginning or ongoing now. I mean, I'm not a business analyst. Um, on the cultural and political side right now, what I call the new prohibition is, I think, a pretty serious obstacle. There's a movement, and I've written about this. That was part of my initial burst of enthusiasm in posting regularly that you mentioned. But there's a movement to take this idea that there's no safe level of alcohol consumption
yeah,
and change the conversation. The conversation when I was growing up and in high school and college was always responsible, moderate drinking. Don't drink and drive.
yeah,
Know your limits. Don't take advantage of somebody else. Don't make a fool of yourself at the office party, sort of thing. Um, Warning labels are really about that. You
yeah,
know, don't operate heavy machinery when you've been drinking. Know what you're doing, idiot. Just get it into your brain.
yeah,
And now I think they're trying to get to the point where they're telling you not to drink,
yeah,
and that any sip you take is going to give you cancer. And that's not what the data says, but that's what the argument is because that shortens it. It's simple, easy to remember.
Yeah.
And this is my PR marketing from my day job, that perspective. But I think we have to fight to keep the conversation on responsible, moderate consumption,
Yeah.
and don't let them change it. Don't let them change the message to don't drink at all. You know,
Yeah.
don't let them change from don't drink and drive to don't drink. And that becomes an issue of personal liberties,
Yeah.
personal individual choice and freedom. And Washington Post fans will see what I did there. But also, I think the other danger for the wine community in that is that we tend to defend ourselves by saying, yeah, but we're the good alcohol.
Right.
And the antis are against any alcohol. And we go, well, but we're not whiskey.
Right.
And that only fractures our side of the argument and weakens us. And I really think that to win the argument, it has to be no. This is my personal right to drink what I want as long as I'm within limits and I'm not. It's not making me do something stupid and hurt somebody or hurt myself. And it's not an easy argument to make.
Yeah. No, it's tough. And I think you hit the nail on the head. We got very involved supporting the Come Together and Come Over October campaigns and all the associations that have kind of come up with their own campaigns to combat that sort of messaging. And you're absolutely right. It's like people aren't really looking at the facts. It's sensationalism. One no safe levels are out there. You drink, you're going to get cancer, and sort of lumping it in with tobacco, with big tobacco, and I think you're right that it's something that we need to pay very close attention to. But but some of the bigger companies are sort of reluctant to get in the fight because they don't want these class action lawsuits that may come out down the road, and you helped cause cancer. It's wild.
Yeah, and there's Felicity Carter has been writing a lot about the forces behind this campaign and being very much the same groups and sometimes even the same people or the same money that were behind the anti-tobacco.
Yeah.
And one thing you learn in political science or organizational theory, is that when an organization succeeds and meets its goal, it doesn't disband. It looks for something else to do and to accomplish. And the anti-tobacco lobby won, and then they started looking around.
Yeah.
Well, let's go after alcohol. So
It's
that's oversimplifying, but it's kind of what we're dealing with.
no, and and that on top of everything else that we're dealing with, it's just brutal out there. Some of the tariffs and the things that we have going on between us and Canada is just absurd and crazy. And it's just, I don't even know. It's like every day's a mystery, it's just crazy.
We could discuss that, but by the time we finished, whatever we're saying would be obsolete because it would have changed again. I saw there's news today about wine tariffs, and I'm just like, okay.
It's funny. So we've got an editorial site there, our wine industry advisor, and we got a couple of pitches from some of our freelancers that we work with about, wanting to write about the tariffs in recent meetings. And I'd said the same thing. I go, why? It's like tomorrow. It's going to be. This is all speculation. I don't. Let's find something else we can focus on because it's what happens today is not going to be necessarily true tomorrow. All right, enough of the politics. We go down the road on this one.
Hey, I'm from DC area, so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but you just like
Live and breathe it.
it's just got to be wild. So now that you're kind of heading into this, this next stage, what about it makes you excited? I mean, you got like that enthusiasm, like, when you're starting off? I mean, 'cause it's like starting, it's not brand new, but I mean, it's starting something different.
Yeah, I mean, Substack was a lot more fun to use than WordPress was, so I'm enjoying that. I'm getting uh decent reception so far. So as I said, if I can establish a rhythm and that enough the subscriber base builds up enough to make it seem worthwhile, I'll keep doing it. But yeah, right now it's kind of weird because it was a double retirement for me, both from the post and from my government job. And people say, "Wow, you retired right at the perfect timing." And I have to stop and say, "Okay, are they saying about the Washington Post, or are they saying about the federal government?" Because actually, turns out both was pretty good timing. Um, but we'll see. There's always the doom scrolling, and
Are you thinking about like just kind of continuing the approach that you've always had, or are you going to say, hey, I'm going to focus on, you know, the East Coast more or the West Coast more? Do you have any, are you to that area? You just saying, no, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing and let it unfold as it does.
right now I'm kind of doing the latter. But I did a piece on a tasting I was invited to recently on Virginia Pinot Noir, and I noticed the numbers went up a little bit on that. I just did a piece on Ukrainian wines that are coming into the U.S. market, and the numbers were a little high on that too.
Yeah,
And there were a couple of pieces where people kind of yawned, and I'm like, oh, okay, So I'll try to take that information into heart. I do want to write more about the East Coast
yeah,
because that's where I am.
yeah,
My less than elegant saying was always, wines from around here, wherever here happens to be. I do want to get into my car a little more and explore New Jersey wineries and
yeah,
Pennsylvania, as well as back down around Charlottesville. I enjoy visiting there. It was hard at first because I was a William and Mary graduate, so going to Charlottesville was enemy territory. But that's where the wineries are. So and North Carolina, I'd like to get down there and
yeah,
visit some of those wineries too. But yeah, if when I can get out to the West Coast, I'll do that as well. Wine is such a fascinating subject, and there are so many interesting places, interesting grapes. Climate change is a fascinating issue. I'd really like to delve into that in some detail. I did for several years with the Post, and I'd like to continue that. Um, but we'll see. Right now, it's a blank slate that I can and sort of write my own ticket to a certain degree. I'm trying to do a little in depth on Oregon Chardonnay, so that'll be a project for the next couple of months, and we'll see.
yeah. Well, that's good for you, man. I mean, I think it must feel pretty refreshing to like have the freedom to kind of explore whatever direction, your heart sort of takes you, and the chance to get, maybe do a little more traveling now since you are retired and spend a little more time in some of those other regions. And there's no shortage of interesting people to talk to in our industry either, which is always makes it a little fun.
That always does, and it's a great group of people, and I always enjoy meeting them and learning their craft and enjoying the product.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Dave, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. This has been interesting for me. For people that want to follow you and subscribe to you on Substack, what do they just go to Substack and Google your name? What should they do?
Um, they can do that, or they can just go to dmwineline.substack.com,
Okay.
and that'll take you right to my page. And subscriptions are easy. They're free for now. I haven't turned on paid subscriptions yet. I may do that at some point, but I want to make sure that this is what I want to do first. So and that, that it's working.
Well, I wish you the best of luck, and we should definitely chat offline, make like so that we're subscribing to your page as well, and when you have things that are going out that are industry relevant, not necessarily maybe wine reviews, because our audience is a little different, but I know that no shortage of opinions on what's happening in our industry, so we'd love to share those as well. And absolutely, if you wind up here in Sonoma County, you'd have to let us know. It would be great to meet in person.
I'll do that. I love Healdsburg. I haven't been back there in a while, so I need to get out there again.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you like this interview, be sure to like our YouTube page and catch up on some of the other ones.